U.S. service members that were killed. It is not political when 20,769 U.S. service members were wounded. It is not political when 18 CIA operatives were killed, or 1,822 civilian contractors killed. It's not political when over 1,000 Americans were left on the ground in Afghanistan. And it's damn well not political when 13 U.S. service members died at the bombing at Abbey Gate. It is not political to want answers for these families, to want answers for the service members, our veterans, who continue to suffer from PTSD. 22 veteran suicides a day. It is not political to want answers for them and their families. So to my colleagues on the other side, tell the Gold Star families that want answers about this disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan that you believe their request to hold Secretary Blinken accountable is political. The service and the sacrifice of our soldiers and our veterans matters, and they deserve answers. And if you want to know what was political, then look no further than the actual disastrous withdrawal. Joe Biden and Kamala Harris announced a date certain to ensure that all U.S. troops were out of Afghanistan before September 11th, 2021, conditions on the ground be damned. Joe Biden wanted to say that he ended the war before the 20th anniversary. If that isn't political, then what the hell is? Antony Blinken has refused to cooperate with this committee, refused to testify before this committee on the withdrawal in the 118th Congress. He has been here twice to testify about the State Department's budget. But he certainly has not afforded this committee the respect to answer the questions related to the disastrous decision to withdraw in violation of the Doha Agreement, not because of the Doha Agreement. This administration chose politics over the safety and well-being of our U.S. service members. They chose politics over the safety and the well-being of the Americans that were left in Afghanistan. They chose politics over the safety and well-being of the Afghan refugees who helped us over the course of this 20-year war. Secretary Blinken has a responsibility to come before this committee, to come before the representatives of the American people, and answer the questions about this disastrous decision to withdraw. Kamala Harris, who said she was the last person in the room, proudly, still has not met with the 13 Gold Star families, still has not offered her personal condolences to those families. She wasn't at the dignified transfer when Joe Biden was looking at his watch, trying to get out of there as fast as he could. This administration's handling of the withdrawal in Afghanistan has created a tinderbox around the world. We are in the most precarious place since World War II because of their disastrous foreign policy, starting with this withdrawal, continuing with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the terrorist attack on Israel, the illicit oil trade between Iran and China, the threats in the Indo-Pacific from China against Taiwan. Add in their botched mishandling of the border. This administration is a disgrace. And the fact that Secretary Blinken couldn't be bothered to be here, not just today, but over the course of this entire 118th Congress, to answer questions on this matter. It matters to these families. It matters to the American people. And it damn well matters to our active duty military and our veterans. The only thing political here was the decision to withdraw by a date certain in violation of the Doha Agreement. That is the only thing that is political, and the fact that my colleagues can't accept that, but would rather carry water for the Secretary of State is an absolute abomination. I yield back.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair recognizes Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Ranking Member Meeks. I rise in opposition to this committee report seeking to hold Secretary Blinken in contempt. What a sad waste of time at such a serious and dangerous moment around the world. This is simply another attempt by the majority to wield the power of this committee to score cheap political points. This action is nothing more than an extension of their highly partisan, cherry-picked report on the Afghanistan withdrawal. As soon as you hit any real substance in the majority's report on the withdrawal, just beyond the table of contents and the list of key people and the grainy pictures that flower this report, you'll find its first fundamental flaw. And again, I'm talking about the majority's Afghanistan withdrawal report. On page 8, let me show it to you. Right here. On page 8, this report presents the finding of the committee's majority investigation into the Biden-Harris administration withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021. The U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan is understood to encompass, note the limitations here, the U.S. military retrograde beginning with go-to-zero order officially announced by President Biden on April 14th, 2021 through the non-combatant evacuation operation ordered by President Biden August 15, 2021. The Afghan withdrawal studied in a prism of 4 months. No way did they want to go back and look at what Mr. Trump might have done to set this in motion. They didn't want to examine that. It's obvious the majority's report was developed from a predetermined political conclusion in this political season, one which shields the action of the Trump administration from criticism and places all blame on the Biden administration. With the hearing at issue, this is the pièce de résistance. I want to read to you what John Bolton and H.R. McMaster, two former Trump national security advisors known for their hawkish views, lambasting both Trump and Biden for the withdrawal, though they've been very critical of the Taliban agreement. This is McMaster. Our Secretary of State, Mike Pompeo, signed a surrender agreement with the Taliban. McMaster said it was a surrender agreement by the Trump administration. Nowhere do we really see much of anything about what Mr. Trump did. If you take a look at the total report, the report includes only half a page of an executive summary and about 8 pages of background out of a total of 345 pages of this report directly focus on the Trump administration. 8 pages of the whole report. On page 41, the first step toward a phased withdrawal resulted in the reduction of U.S. forces to 8,600. That drawdown was completed by the summer of 2020. 2020, election year, shows the withdrawal actually started under the Trump administration. And this, the most puzzling of facts, not really examined at all by this committee because they don't want to look at what Mr. Trump did. Additionally, in July of 2020, President Trump pursued another phased drawdown, reducing troops to 4,500. And then in January, just before Mr. Biden was sworn into office, they reduced by another 2,500 troops. Nobody wants to examine that on the other side of the aisle? You don't want to see what weakness that created, what opportunity that created for the Taliban? by way of Secretary Blinken. He's come before this congressional committee to provide testimony on numerous occasions, including multiple times before this very committee. And the State Department has provided 20,000 pages of documents at his direction. Despite the continued attacks by the majority, the Secretary remains willing to come to this committee, as he wrote in a letter just yesterday, second letter. I think it has been entered into the record. We have consulted with the Department of Justice, and it has concluded the committee may not constitutionally compel the Secretary appear on September 24th, as so doing would prevent the Secretary from fulfilling the President's directive to represent the United States at the UN. We don't even have the constitutional authority to do this. I submit that for the record. So finally, I think no matter what we're saying here, this rush to subpoena and then this rush to this resolution condemning the Secretary, where were we when Mr. McCarthy and 4 other GOP leaders were issued subpoenas by the January 6th committee? It was Mr. McCarthy, Mr. Jordan, Scott Perry of this very committee, Andy Biggs, Mo Brooks. Where was our outrage then when they failed to appear for their subpoenas? This is a political stunt. It is dangerous. It is sad. It is nakedly an attempt.
Afghanistan withdrawal. I do. And I think we should get to the bottom of those mistakes, intelligence failures, because the whole idea is to make sure that they never happen again. That's how, you never want to be a general fighting the last war. You want to know what went wrong so that you don't repeat them. And I'm grateful, and the country is grateful for Brian Mast's sacrifice. And I'm grateful to my fellow Floridians, Corey Mills, Tim Walz, Anna Paulina Luna, who all served in different capacities in the military. But I think 2 things can be true, and here's the second thing that I think is true. The second thing that's true is that I don't question my colleagues' intent, and I don't question the chairman's intent. But perception, the perception which you don't control and I don't control, is that you're doing this 42 days before an election. Not 6 months ago, not 6 months ago, not a year ago. I think what went on in Afghanistan is one of the most important things that we could find out to make sure it doesn't happen again. So then, you know what? Tell the speaker to cancel recess. Let's have more hearings on Afghanistan. Why haven't we had more hearings on Afghanistan? This Congress has had more hearings on gas stoves and refrigerators and ceiling fans and blenders than they've had on Afghanistan. And that's not the chairman's fault, but that's this Congress. Let me tell you what this Congress has spent their time on. We've removed the speaker, which had never happened in American history. We've impeached a cabinet secretary, hadn't happened in 150 years. We tried to remove another speaker, that failed. We've held the attorney general in contempt, and now we want to hold the secretary of state in contempt. But what about solving the actual problems that happen in Afghanistan? We owe that to the Gold Star families. We absolutely owed that to the Gold Star families. But we're doing it 42 days before the election, all of a sudden. And again, I don't question the chairman's intent. The chairman, I think, on Ukraine and Israel has been a voice of reason in his party, in this Congress. But he can't control the perception, and I can't control it either. And people are going to ask themselves, we're leaving here tomorrow. Tomorrow. We're going to pass the CR and go home. And we're having this hearing today. So the story that's going to be told is as Congress goes out the door, leaves for a 5-week recess, they want to hold the Secretary of State in contempt. I don't know what that does for the Gold Star families. Does that make them feel better? No. Making sure there aren't more Gold Star families is what we should be doing. Making sure the mistakes that were made, making sure those don't repeat themselves. But this doesn't do that at all. 6 months ago, we could have done that. 8 months ago, we could have done that. We could have been doing this, quite frankly, bi-weekly, having hearings on Afghanistan. But that's not what the 118th Congress has focused on. It hasn't focused on that. And so I hope for the sake of our military families and for the next conflict that we are unaware of, that we do get to the failures in Afghanistan and make sure that something like that doesn't happen again. But this isn't it. This isn't it. This is what the American people question about Congress. It's why we have a 17% approval rating, which, by the way, there's room to grow, lots. But they're going to ask that question. They're going to ask all of a sudden, 24 hours before you leave for a 5-week break. Look, I'll stay if we want to have more hearings in Afghanistan. It's more important than my reelection, quite frankly. So if we want to do that, I'll stay. I'll do that. But we're not going to do that. We're going to go home. And then we're going to come back in a lame duck session, right? We're going to leave the 118th Congress, probably never getting to the bottom of all this. And so I think that's disappointing. But I commit myself to work with my colleagues across the aisle to find out what happened in Afghanistan, right? But my colleagues should be aware, whether it's their intent or not, it's 42 days before the election, it's a day before we're leaving, and that's how this will get framed. You can't control that. That's how this will get framed, even if it wasn't your intent. And people will ask, well, if it was so serious, why didn't we do this 6 months ago? I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields. Chair recognizes Mr. McCormick.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. When we talk about timing, you're right, it is kind of inconvenient timing that we waited 3.5 years